If you've been with us, you know that we have been working through the book of Job. We are taking our time through this book, and yet we are leaping at some parts through vast sections of it. It is a big book for us to be looking at, and so we're doing this in chunks. The story is still unfolding. Job is still on the ash heap. His friends have gathered around him, and one by one they have begun to share their thoughts. Last week we examined what Eliphaz had to say in regards to the situation. You might remember that Eliphaz's whole look at Job's circumstance was simply that there was, if you want to say it, a mechanism in the universe. You do something bad, and something bad happens to you. It's just a given. That's just the way it is. It is divine retribution, and it is automatic, it is guaranteed, and clearly if you are in pain and agony, it is because you have done something wrong. This morning, we're going to look at 3 chapters as we continue the story of Job and consider what Bildad had to say. Now, I need to get this out of the way before we go too much further. Bildad the Shuhite has the world's oldest and perhaps lamest joke ever going. And so we need to just straight up say this. Bildad the Shuhite, the shortest man in the Bible. If I don't tell you that, somebody afterwards will think they're really funny and they've just come up with a joke that I've never heard before. If you're still using this material, you need to keep your day job. And you need to get some new material. Anyways, all that to say, it's all cute and whatever, but I just get that out of the way so you don't think you're the first to say that to us, since that joke is nearly as old as Moses. Speaking of Moses, did you know that Moses played tennis? He served in Pharaoh's court. Seriously. You need new material, people. Just move on, okay? Move on. Okay, really, stop it. All right. So Bildad, let's consider this. Beginning in chapter 8. We're going to try and go through 3 chapters, which is going to take us some leaping. We're not going to be looking at every single verse, but I certainly want to give you a sense of the text, and so we need to move fairly rapidly. Bildad now responds to what Job has said. And he responds, and we very quickly recognize and learn that Bildad is not the nicest guy on the ash heap. He seems to be a little bit bold in speaking, and certainly he has no trouble speaking his mind. How long will you say these things? Would you just quit talking? And the words of your mouth be a great wind. By the way, this insult is passed back and forth a number of times throughout the book. They say that each other is speaking as a wind. This is not meant as a compliment. In fact, the word great there is actually the word for a destructive wind, like a hurricane kind of wind. What he's saying is your words are actually dangerous, but they actually have no substance to them. All that you've said is nonsense. And then he lays out his case. He explains why Job is so off base. This is the premise right here, nuts and bolts of Bildad's theology. Does God pervert justice? The answer is no. God will not pervert justice. God cannot pervert justice. God is a just God. Or does the Almighty pervert the right? The answer is no. God is a just God. God is a right God. God never does anything wrong. Ergo, if you are on an ash heap in all kinds of pain and difficulty, clearly God, who does nothing wrong, is doing this because you have done something wrong. God is always a God of perfect justice. Will God unbalance his scales just for you? Would God, that idea of pervert justice is actually a word that's used throughout the Old Testament, Amos 8 verse 5. It's used in regards to the marketplace where they had scales that were unbalanced, that they were false scales. They appeared to be balanced, and you would go and buy your 6 ounces of sugar or butter or whatever you laid on the scale, but the scales were not quite accurate. So you were actually getting less than you paid for. The scales were perverted. They were twisted, distorted. That's the idea of the word. Does God distort? Does God have unbalanced scales? The answer obviously is no. And this is actually a truth. It is clearly true of God. We read this in Deuteronomy 32, for example. One example, verse 4. The rock, his work is perfect, For all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity. And he is just and upright is he. God is always perfect. He does nothing wrong. He weighs out everything correctly. Justice is always measured out as it should be. This is why God, if I can say politely, should be feared. I mean, we read in Romans 3:23, this famous verse, the wages of sin is death. What is that? That is the justice of God. What are wages? You know wages. If you work for 40 hours a week, you do not want 36 hours of pay. You don't even want 39 and a half hours of pay. You want justice. You want the exact payment for your work. The wages, the exact payment for the outworking of sin, the wages of sin equals the justice of God. God is always just. It is eternal death. This is why we need a Savior. This is why we must be rescued from our sin. This is why the New Testament call is for everyone to repent and believe, because there is coming a day of perfect justice. This is our God. And Bildad knew that this is God. And so Bildad just points out that simple, plain, clear truth. Is God a God of justice? Yes, he is implied. Does he have unbalanced scales? Would he pervert justice just for you? No, Job. Clearly, God always does what is right. If your children have sinned against them, he has delivered them into the hand of their transgression. Justice was served. Your children, obviously, because of their death, clearly, they had done something wrong. God never makes mistakes. He is justice. If you will seek God and plead the Almighty for mercy, if you're pure and upright, surely then he will rouse himself for you and restore your rightful habitation. Well, now this is a bit of a contradiction. Bildad is also sounding like he actually believes that God is a God of mercy. And that is exactly Bildad's problem with his sort of twisted theology. Yes, he has latched onto a truth that God is a God of justice. But God is not only justice. He is ruling out the fact that God is also a God of patience and long-suffering. He is a God of mercy. And he has forgotten that God is not just a God of retribution. This idea of you do something wrong and God strikes you with lightning is the thinking of Job's day. But you know, interestingly enough, in our day, our thinking has swung all the way, the pendulum has come all the way to the other side. We don't see a God of retribution who would get us back the moment we do something wrong. In our thinking, not necessarily in this building, but the general culture, the culture has swung all the way over here that the God of the universe would do nothing to harm anybody. He loves everyone. And in fact, doesn't that lay on the dilemma that they have, that they begin to believe in a God who is such love, they would never dole out retribution, and then something wrong happens, and it doesn't match their preconceived idea of God, and now there's a problem. They call it the problem of evil. Why is it a problem? Because their notion of God is twisted. They believe that God should never allow evil to come into my life. I should never have a toothache or a stub toe. I should never have a problem. I should never have anything happen to me, because God loves me. The exact twisted thinking to the pendulum swing is exactly what exists today. The unbalanced view of who God is. And Bildad was preaching a view of God that was through a tunnel, a very small tunnel, a very incorrect view. But if you seek him, if you plead for him, he'll restore you. And clearly what he's implying is, because you're still on the ash heap, it's obvious that God is not on your side. It's obvious he's against you. For inquire, please, of bygone ages. Consider what the fathers have searched out. Do you remember last week Eliphaz had to bolster his position by spiritualizing it, telling everyone that he knew what he had to say because the revelation from the Spirit had come to him. He had a vision and he heard a voice, and that's how he could lay down the authority of what he was saying. Bildad is now leaning and trying to bolster his case, and now trying to point out, I didn't make this up. Everybody has believed this for generations. Inquire. Go look back what everybody in generations past have believed. Consider what the fathers have believed. Search it out for yourself. But we're just here for a few decades. We're here but yesterday, and we don't know anything. We haven't learned. If you want to know deep things, you've got to listen to what the people before you said. Tradition will always rule over truth. For our days on earth are a shadow. Will they not teach you and tell you and utter words out of their understanding? Don't you know this, Job? Everybody believes this. That is, by the way, no basis for ever coming to understand what truth is. We could all vote this morning that God does not exist. It is irrelevant what we decide on a vote. Whether the whole entire culture chooses to believe something, it doesn't make it true. Truth remains outside of us. It is not invented. We do not create it. It is discovered. It is always beyond us. It doesn't matter what history says, in one sense. He borrows also a little example, which I think is not the best example, but hey, I'm not arguing his point. He now borrows from nature. Tries to express this very truth that God is justice. Can a papyrus grow where there is no marsh? Can reeds flourish where there is no water? Do bulrushes grow in the desert? No. Why? They need water, and what happens when the water is removed? They die. Yet yet in flower and not cut down, they wither before any other plant. As soon as the water is removed, they shrivel. It's justice. We take God out of the picture, and what happens? Verse 13, such are the paths of all who forget God. The hope of the godless shall perish. It's the same. Everybody in the past has believed this. Nature itself shows this. God is justice. And clearly, if you are suffering, if you are going through difficulty, if you have hard times, it's because you're getting exactly what you deserve. It's because you're getting exactly what should be coming to you. Bildad goes on, his confidence is severed. His trust is a spider's web. He leans against his house, but it does not stand. He lays hold of it, but it does not endure. He borrows two things that are, one, very weak to our minds. A spider can stand on a web. A bug gets caught in it, can't get out. You lean on a spider's web, you go right through it, don't you? And then you walk the rest of the day trying to get it off your face and look like a moron because there's something no one else can see while you're doing this. Okay, I just think that's funny. Then he borrows the other contrast. You lean on something solid, something you trust, something you depend on, what your family has. It doesn't endure. This is just poetic language. He's just trying to say, you've got all the confidence in the world in yourself. You've got all the confidence, self-confidence, but it will not hold. You know, it's interesting. You could almost preach a gospel truth, a gospel message on what Bildad is saying. Because God is a God of justice. And you cannot lean on your own self-righteousness, on your own self-confidence. He's right. But he is wrong in another sense. Behold, God will not reject the blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers. Is that true? Yes, that's true. That is who God is. And Bildad has latched onto a truth about God and declared it to be true in all circumstance, in every situation. God never reverses the law of retribution. And if you're sick, if you've got problems, if you've got issues, clearly you're not blessed of God. Job answered, chapter 9, and said, truly, I know that it is so. You haven't told me anything I don't know. God is a God of justice, I know that. But here's my question. This is my dilemma. How can a man be in the right before God? That is the issue, Bildad. It has nothing to do with God's supreme justice. How can a man be in the right before God? What does he mean by that? How can a man be in the right before God? Well, supposing you were put on trial by God. Supposing God decided to accuse you of something, and he called you to the witness stand. And this is the picture that Bildad has brought into the conversation, and Job latches onto this courtroom idea. How could a person ever hope to be acquitted if God has a case against you? If God decides that there is something against you, who in the world could ever be found right? everybody has something somewhere that God would find a reason to do something for them. His argument, in a sense, to build that back is, why isn't everybody suffering? Everybody has something somewhere that they've done wrong. Nobody is 100% perfect. Job asks, if one wished to contend with him, one could not answer him once in 1,000 times. If one wished to contend with him, one could not answer him once in 1,000 times. What does that mean? If you want to contend with God, if you want to now lay your case against God, you know how your neighbor borrows your rake or your lawnmower, and they run over some rocks with your lawnmower and utterly destroy it and then sneak it back and put it in your garage and pretend that it didn't happen? And you now have an opportunity to do something, to get some retribution legally. I don't mean your own retribution that your own cunning, conniving heart would come up with. I don't mean that. I don't mean some ridiculous response. I mean a legal response. You would gather information, and I'm just borrowing a stupid example of a lawnmower because none of us would be that petty to do this. If I said an example, you might say, hey, you're talking about me. I'm not talking about anybody. You decide to lay a case, and you gather the evidence to, quote unquote, get what you deserve, to sue them, legal terms. All right, to get a legal response back from your neighbor. So you lay a case, a charge against them because you have been the innocent victim of their ignorance with your property. You're the innocent victim. I'm laying charges against you. How, Job asks, how does anybody do that with God? Job says, I'm the innocent victim here. I have not done anything wrong. There is no reason for this wrong in my life. There is nothing on my account that God would respond to me. But how in the world does somebody take a case and say, God, you're wrong? How in the world does somebody try to respond to God and say, I am the innocent victim. You have done me wrong. How do I contend with you? You're God. How in the world does anybody, this is where Job begins to unravel with his thinking about God. And a little seed thought springs into Job's mind and it begins to develop. God is unfair. And how many times have we heard ourselves think these very thoughts or feel this very way? That is not fair. That is not right. There is no reason for that. They did not deserve that. There is no reason on earth. God should not have allowed that to happen. Well, Job is doing the same thing. If I was to contend with him, that is, if I was to try and make a case against God that he has done something unfair, one could not answer him once in 1,000 times. If I was put on the stand and we're going to bring our case before court, he would drill me with questions and I would not be able to give one single answer. He's God. He could do everything is in his favor. He can do whatever he wants. He can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, to whoever he wants. That's not fair. And Job is beginning to realize the situation that he faces. He is under the scrutiny of a sovereign God who has chosen of his own free will to give him suffering. He goes on to extol the virtues of God. He is wise in heart, mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him and succeeded. The answer? Nobody. Harden your heart against God. Somehow think you don't need him in your life. Let's see how that works out for you. Verse 5, he who removes mountains and they know it not. He overturns them in his anger and shakes the earth out of its place and its pillars. He's talking about earthquakes and changing the very fabric of the world. Who does that but God? We've seen that this week in Hawaii. Who commands the sun and it does not rise? Who seals up the stars? Who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? Who has that kind of power? God. Who made the bear and the Orion and Pleiades and the chambers of the south? Who does great things beyond searching out and marvelous things beyond numbers? I'm sure you know this, the bear, the Orion, the Pleiades, chambers of the south. He's referencing the constellations. I'm sure you're aware of that, but just for the sake of it, he's just talking about the universe. God has made the Pleiades, the 7 sister stars, I believe sometimes they're called, this little star cluster in our galaxy. He's just saying, God is great and he's done all these marvelous things. He can do whatever he wants. What are you supposed to do when you're a little pipsqueak and you're on the receiving end of God's suffering? That's not fair. Behold, he passes by me and I see him not. And there's a contrast. The God who's flung the stars into space, who does all these marvelous things. Now he sneaks into my life and I don't even know he's done this. He moves on and I don't perceive it. Behold, he snatches away. He takes somebody from this world. He causes grief. Who can turn him back? He can sneak into anybody's life. Job is beginning to think about this. This is the God who is. I'm not sure I like this idea of God. I really like the idea of a God who's swung all the way over here, who's got such a God of love that he would never allow something like this. But is this what God is? He sneaks into your life and he snatches something, and who can turn him back? Who will say to him, what are you doing? Now that's a really good question. You ever had that question to somebody? Your wives walk in and your husband's doing whatever and you're like, what are you doing? And the tone of your voice requires that person to give an accounting, and you're actually probably implying, you don't know what you're doing, let me do that for you. Let me show you how that's done. You're trying to load the dishwasher? That's what it is in my house. What are you doing? You obviously don't know how to take a plate and put it in the dishwasher. Pardon me for saying so. Who can say that to God? Ever. That's Job's dilemma. Who can say, what are you doing? Clearly nobody. God will not turn back his anger. Beneath him bowed the helpers of Rahab. I'm just pointing this verse out to you because it's a rather quirky verse and I don't want to get into it too much, but I just wanted to explain it. I know most of you could be happy enough if we just glossed over it and never read it, but I would not. Rahab is not a reference to Rahab in the book of Joshua or the book of Judges, because this book of Job was written well before that history ever took place. This is not that Rahab. The woman Rahab was named after this word Rahab. It is a superstitious idea of a sea monster, of the creatures of the deep. It's a mythological creature that governs the sea creatures of the underworld. It is Poseidon. And Job is not for one single second declaring that he believes in mythology. He is just declaring what we would say if we said something like, God is so powerful that he's even more powerful than Superman. He's even more powerful than Zeus would have to bow the knee to him. If he existed, he rules over him. That's all that he's referencing. God will not turn back his anger. He even has the victory over the depths of the sea. And if you've been with us through our talk through the Old Testament and the talks about through Revelation, the sea is always the place of murkiness, the place of confusion. Landlubbers knew nothing of what was under the sea. It was the place of all scariness and wickedness and evil came from the sea. That is why in the book of Revelation, the beast, the Antichrist, comes out of the sea. So if you want to go to the worst place on earth, you go to the sea if you're a Jew. So even the place in the depths of the oceans, I know I've over-explained that, but I decided to explain to you what that is talking about because it's rather obscure to our 21st century Gentile ears. How then can I answer him? Choosing my words with him. Job's answering his own questions. Though I'm in the right, though I've done nothing wrong, and though I do not deserve this, I cannot answer him. He can do whatever he wants. I must appeal for mercy to my accuser. If it is a contest of strength, behold, who's going to win an arm wrestling match with God? He's mighty. It's a matter of justice. Who can call him into court and say, you've done something wrong? You're God. You're always just. Though I am in the right, my own mouth would condemn me. Something somewhere I would say that's wrong. Though I'm blameless, he would prove me perverse. I have no hope of winning my case. In fact, he begins to now take a step further. Not only is God not fair, but God is actually mean. if I wash myself with snow, cleanse my hands with lye. This is the same figurative example that Pilate did before Jesus, just showing that he had no sin. If I could prove myself to be blameless, if I could demonstrate it fully, you would push me into a mud puddle. Even if I could prove I'm blameless, you would plunge me into a pit. My own clothes would abhor me. I'm beginning to think that you are not a good God after all. I am beginning to think that if you let unfairness happen to me, then in fact you are not a God who is always a God of justice and love and mercy. There's a mean streak in you, and this I do not like. You are not a good God. Job never fancies this thought, but it is beginning to boil up in his head. And let me tell you, these are the very same thoughts that we find ourselves thinking that the world has already concluded when they begin to look at the problem of evil and the sovereignty of God. He is not a man that I might answer him that he should come to we should come to trial together. There is no arbiter, there is no lawyer between us who might lay his hand on us both. I'm stuck. I'm rocking a hard place here. I've got to put up with this. There's nothing I can do about it. It comes from God. I'm not sure he's just. I'm not sure he's being good. This is so unfair. There's nothing I can do about it. I loathe my life. I will give free utterance to my complaint. Okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm just going to say what I'm thinking. I'm going to give free utterance now. Now you're going to hear me two barrels. I am so upset and ticked off and tired of this. I'll speak in the bitterness of my soul. Here it comes. Does it seem good to you to oppress? He's talking to God. Are you enjoying this? Is this fun for you? To despise the work of your hands and favor the designs of the wicked? You're having fun? Is this a good thing for you? Your hands fashioned me, and now you've destroyed me altogether. Remember that you have made me like clay. Will you return me to the dust? Did you not pour me out like milk and curdle me like cheese? You clothed me with skin and flesh and knit me together with bones and sinews. I'm not sure how graphic I want to be with this text, but this is rather crass. This is talking about the creation of a human being. The liquid form in which we begin, the milky substance in which we come from, and then are shaped into a uterine form that takes on the soft substance of cheese. And then you clothe me with skin and flesh. This is right to my mother's womb. You are the reason I'm here. You made me. You started this. I can't exist without you. You knit me together in bones and sinews. You have granted me life and steadfast love, and your care has preserved my spirit. You gave me life all the way till now. Here's my question. Yet these things you hid in your heart. You knew exactly what you were going to do. You knew that this day would come. You knew that I would be in this kind of pain. You knew that you were going to snatch my children from me. You knew that you were going to take my business and my profits and all my loss and my money and my home and everything. You knew that you were going to take my life right to the brink and let me live die a long, slow, painful death. You knew right from the beginning, and you did this on purpose. Job is angry at God. You hid these things in your heart. I know that this was your purpose. Why did you bring me out from the womb? Would that I had died before any eye had seen me, and as though I had not been carried from the womb to the grave. Why? Are not my days few? Then cease and leave me alone, that I may find a little cheer before I go. And I shall not return to the land of darkness and deep shadow. He's talking about the grave. Job, you know the end of the book of Job, I would like to think. And you know that Job, not only does he live, but he fully prospers. Job does not know the end of the book of Job. And Job is basing everything he's saying on his assumption. If I can just lay out a quick little lesson to us here. It is very easy to look at our circumstances around us and never believe that God has an end game in sight that actually could be better than this. And Job presumes, based on what I know, I am going to die. There are no two ways about it, and God might as well just get it over with. And Job is basing everything about his life on his presumption that he knows what God has for him in the future. Are not my days few? Then cease and leave me alone, that I might find a little cheer before I go. And I shall not return. Just reminding you, once I'm gone to the land of darkness and deep shadow, the land of gloom with like thick darkness, like deep shadow without any order, where light is as thick as darkness. You get how dark he's trying to say this place is? He's talking about the grave. You're going to put me in the grave. I'm going to be in the grave. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. Thank you very much, God. That's the way Job ends chapter 10. This is the middle of the story. This is where Job is at. We pick this up next week with Zophar. What do we learn from this? What can we pull out of this interesting and quirky little text that God has given to us to examine in His holy word? Let's just remember a few things. God's silence is not an indication of His disapproval. Job heard nothing from God in the midst of all that was going on. He heard from his friends who had bad theology, good theology used in a bad way. He never heard anything from God. He knew nothing from God. All he knew was more suffering and suffering on top of his suffering. And God's silence was aggravating to Job. Sometimes God's silence is exactly what God wants to give us, and it really frustrates us. And we're in the midst of our pain, the midst of our depths, the midst of our agony, the midst of our family situation, the midst of everything, and God seems so silent. What is going on? Why is He letting this happen? Why is He allowing us to just go and trudge through this wilderness? Why does He feel so far away? I don't know the answers, but I know that God's silence is not indicative of the fact that God is against you. God is not against you just because you're in the midst of a trial. And just because He is silent. The glory of this text is just a reminder that our suffering begins to make us think wrong thoughts about the character of God. This is a normal process, if you want to say it that way. We actually begin to process, I would say, one of the reasons that God allows suffering into our lives is because it forces us to grapple with the reality of who God really is. Really is. Not the false idea of Santa Claus God that we like. Not the idea of candy giving God that makes us happy all the time that we like. But the reality of who God really, really is. And sometimes that process takes a little while. And we actually go to wrong places about God. Are you really not a good God? Are you really being unfair? How does this all work? Well, God may be letting you, drawing you deeper, closer to understanding Himself right through the midst of your suffering. God allows suffering, but we must not ever allow our suffering to reach a conclusion, a false idea about God. Keep wrestling through who God is. Remember, as we see from Job, our confusion, this wrestling, our emotions, our concerns, our railing against God, our calling Him unfair, Job is never rebuked for this. This is Job's human response. And we are told that Job remains blameless. Is it okay to be angry at God? In a sense, yes. There can be a limit to that. There can be a line that you cross. But in a sense, as you're working through this, this is the way God has made us. Do I understand suffering in its fullness? No. Do I understand why everything is the way it is? No. Do I know that God is sovereign? Yes. Do I know that God is sovereign over your suffering? Yes. Do I know what He's doing in your life? No. But God does. God does. And in the midst of this, we draw closer to Him, we learn who He is, we listen to Him, and we realize that God is with us in the midst of our tragedy. And this is